What is up YouTube? This is Alex aka Foreign. Today we're gonna talk about which GTX 1050 Ti to buy. I have 25 cards in this table of mine here, and we'll be talking about ASUS, EVGA, Gaming, Gigabyte, MSI, Palit, and Zotac cards. There are definitely other cards and companies that aren't mentioned here, but these are the ones that can be found in most of the countries that watch these videos. If your card isn't here, or if you are choosing a different card from what is mentioned here, then make sure to leave a comment below and I'll try to get back to you with my opinion on the card that you want to buy. What we're going to talk about here today is core clock and boost clocks, which don't really matter, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But the things that do matter, if the card has or doesn't have a 6-pin power connector, the number of fans, and of course the price. Now, why do core and boost clocks not really matter? With Pascal, Nvidia released the GPU Boost 3.0, which actually helps the card boost much higher than its advertised boost clock. So for instance, if this here is around 1500 megahertz, then the card will most probably boost to around 1700. And Pascal in general has huge overclocking potential. So at launch, the GTX 1050 Ti was locked to 1911 megahertz max. I don't know if Nvidia fixed that bug from the launch period or not, but you can definitely expect up to 1911 megahertz on basically 90% of these cards in good airflow conditions. So that's why core and boost clocks don't really matter. Here are the pictures of the cards. It's important to note that companies may use the same coolers on different models of cards. So for instance, Gigabyte Windforce cooler here is used on 3 different cards, and Strix cooler is used on both the Strix and the Strix OC cards. The prices vary between these models, but the difference is only in pre-overclock between these cards. Now, I mentioned that the 6-pin plays an important role in choosing a GTX 1050 Ti, and that's due to the reason that the GTX 1050 Ti is so power efficient, it doesn't necessarily need the 6-pin that is included. But most cards that include the 6-pin are actually fairly expensive, over $160 most often. And at that price point, you're much better off adding an extra $5 to $10 and getting an RX 470, which I've talked about in my previous video. I definitely look skeptically at the cards that include a 6-pin because they're most likely fairly expensive. Now let's start with the overview. ASUS would be the first one. Their stack starts with the ASUS Phoenix card, which is priced at $150. It does not require a 6-pin. It is a typical small single fan card that will do its job fairly well, but may definitely get hotter than the dual card versions, for instance, like the ASUS Expedition and dual cards, which start at $160-ish. I couldn't find the price for the Expedition card, but most likely it's $165 or $155. Either way, both the dual and Expedition cards are very good. They have 2 fans, they have a bigger heatsink. They don't have a 6-pin. They're good buys if they're under $150. ASUS has a flagship model called the Strix, and the GTX 1050 Ti also has a Strix model, both a Strix and a Strix OC, and they range from $170 to $175 and require a 6-pin. Now in this price range, I would definitely recommend looking at the RX 470, especially since the card has a 6-pin power input. That means that your power supply can most likely handle an RX 470, no problem. Next up is EVGA. Their stack starts with the EVGA Gaming and Superclock Gaming. The prices are $150 to $150. It doesn't require a 6-pin. Typical single fan cooler will do the job, but a dual fan card will definitely do it better. But again, then you have to pay more. The EVGA Super Clocked or SSC edition does not require a 6-pin, but costs more than the single card version. EVGA's flagship model for the 1050 Ti would be the FTW, or for the Win card. It's priced at $170 and requires a 6-pin. But the thing with EVGA's FTW card is that there's a second, cheaper model that uses the same high quality cooler, but is called the DT, and it is not pre-overclocked. So that means that it will most probably be around that $165 to $160 range. And if you definitely need an EVGA GTX 1050 Ti with a 6-pin for whatever reason, then I would definitely recommend looking at the EVGA FTW DT than the regular FTW version, as it will have the same cooler, just not pre-overclocked as high. With manual overclocking, you'll be able to reach the same speeds either way. The next card is the Gain Ward. I included only the single fan typical card. It starts at 140, most likely. Doesn't have a 6-pin. This is your typical run-of-the-mill GTX 1050 Ti that is good for smaller cases that don't have a good power supply. A very decent card if it is $140. Now, Gigabyte has 5 cards in its lineup. It starts with the Gigabyte Mini, which actually has a 6-pin connector according to multiple sources that I've found, though I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. If you want a Gigabyte GTX 1050 Ti specifically, then this card will do its job just fine. The only card out of the Gigabyte lineup that does not include a 6-pin connector is the Gigabyte OC regular model, and it is priced at $150. It uses this same cooler, which is actually a fairly decent cooler, and I think that this is Gigabyte's best offering here. Both the WindForce and WindForce OC cards use a 6-pin connector, unfortunately, and range from $160 to $170, which is not good value for a GTX 1050 Ti in my opinion. Now, the G1 Gaming is Gigabyte's flagship model. It's priced at $170 and uses a 6-pin. This price, you're most definitely better off getting an RX 470. MSI also has 5 cards in its lineup. Their lineup starts with the MSI Mini, which starts at 140, doesn't require a 6-pin, and is very tiny, can fit into small cases. Now, the next in the lineup would be the MSI TOC, or just the MSI GTX 1050 Ti 4G OC card, or whatever that model's name is. It's basically a dual version of the Mini, has a beefier heatsink, 2 fans, so it'll stay cooler and quieter than the small card, but you're also paying a premium for that at $10. What's interesting about MSI's lineup is the inclusion of a low-profile GTX 1050 Ti. So if you have a pre-built system that has very little space, so even a single card will not fit, then the MSI low profile is actually an amazing buy. It's pretty expensive at $170, but it's aimed at specific people who cannot buy any other card apart from this, because it has a smaller PCB that will fit in any case basically. It doesn't have a 6-pin, which is also a great bonus. Now, MSI's flagship model is the Gaming and Gaming X cards. They're priced from $160 to $165 USD and requires 6-pin. At that price, you're definitely better off getting a RX 470 for that extra $10 to $15. But this card uses a beautiful heatsink and has a heat pipe that can cool the GPU very well. Palit, in the StormX line, they have the Palit StormX and the Palit StormX dual cards. The Palit StormX starts at 145, maybe 140 at some point soon, and neither of these cards require a 6-pin connector. Now, I couldn't find the price for the Palit StormX dual card, but it's most likely $155 to $160. It's arguable if you should get that for a dual fan card, because it's pretty close to that $170. And for much cheaper, you can get a dual fan MSI TOC card. Next up is Zotac. They have the $140 Zotac Mini, which is a good choice, and the $155 Zotac OC card, which is beautiful in my opinion. It has 2 heat pipes, which means it'll have great cooling potential, but it is $155, which is on the edge of that price. So it's hard to recommend, but also out of the GTX 1050 Ti's, I'd say that this is actually the best card if it would be $150. So I guess that's about it. Here are all the cards again. We've talked about more or less 25 cards. To sum it up, I have a little different table here. Basically, all the GTX 1050 Ti's that are under $150 and do not require a 6-pin power connector are recommended by me. If the card is over $160 or has a 6-pin connector, then an RX 470 is recommended, because if the card has a 6-pin power connector, then your power supply can most likely support that RX 470, so you don't have to worry about power. And if the card is over $160, then adding that extra $10 will net you 15 to 20% more performance in games. So that would equate to around 7 to 10 FPS in an average game. If your game has 40 FPS with a GTX 1050 Ti, then with an RX 470 it will most probably have around 55 FPS, which is much better. In the end, I'd recommend the ASUS Phoenix card, the EVGA Gaming and SC Gaming cards, the Gigabyte OC, the dual fan one, that's a great buy, the MSI Mini, and the MSI TOC cards, the Palit StormX, and the Zotac Mini card. Now the Zotac OC edition is a great buy if you can find it for 150 or lower. That would actually be the best value for a GTX 1050 Ti in my opinion. Now 2 weeks ago I also hosted a giveaway in a video where I discussed the GTX 1050 Ti and the RX 470, and we have a winner, and his name is Patrick. He has already replied to my email regarding the key, and I will send it shortly. Stay tuned if you're interested in more giveaways. My next plan would be to release an RX 470 video before February. I thank you for your attention and hope to see you later.